Okay, so welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video. My name is Jonathan M.S. Pierce. Thanks for tuning in. Today, I'm going to have a chat, and it will be a nice, relaxed chat with someone that you might know as skydivephil, but I think has come out more recently as Phil Halper. I think it'd be okay to say that. And he was a large part of my life very early on into my sort of skepticism. By point of fact that William Lane Craig was this big name that everyone was all about, singing his praises if you're a Christian or attacking him if you're an atheist. And then suddenly there came along these videos with fronted by a woman who happened to be Phil's wife, who was bringing into play these brilliant criticisms of the Kalam at the time, particularly, and that got me inspired actually into writing my thesis on the Kalam, which became a book. Did God create the universe from nothing? Countering William Lane Craig's Kalam cosmological argument. Anyway, so he and his wife produced these videos that were really good criticisms. That then he went on to talk about sort of animal suffering and pain with regard to theology as well, and then created these amazing video documentaries involving interviews with some of the world's greatest physicists, theoretical physicists. So I thought now's a good time to talk to him, because that's a few years in the past now, and these videos that he's doing are gathering sort of momentum and have increasing expertise both as video documentaries, but also in what the interviewees are saying. So I thought it'd be a fantastic opportunity to speak to him. Anyway, without further ado, welcome Phil to this chat.
Thank you, Jonathan. Nice to be here.
Yeah, and thank you so much for what you've done. Would you like to introduce yourself and how you got into doing initially those critical videos of Craig, and then the video of the cosmological documentaries?
Right, so I set up the YouTube channel. God, I don't even know when it was. Maybe it was around 2010. I think. I don't even remember. A long time ago. And I had no idea what I was going to do with it. Hence why it's got a name that's got nothing to do with the subject matter. Actually, I think the first thing was in London we have this thing called Speaker's Corner. So I was there once, and there was some Muslims that I was debating or discussing. There wasn't like a formal debate, but they thought, I was quite eloquent, and that was nice. And they invited me onto I've got my cat here. He might jump on a laptop, by the way. He likes to do that. I'll try and stop him. They invited me to do this TV debate. I mean, I was literally just a guy they met in the street. I think they just wanted someone to debate, and so I did this, and it was with this guy called Adam Dean.
Oh, yeah, I've seen him loads on The Big Questions, which for American viewers is a BBC production which took place every Sunday. In fact, I was on The Big Questions once for free will.
Oh, right, cool.
Yeah, discussing free will. But Adam Dean is someone they trot on to defend Islamic points of view. I mean, he's a convert to Islam, wasn't he?
So his story was that at first he was quite an extremist. I think he was part of al-Muhajirin, I believe, that got banned. And he gradually went more and more and more and more moderate until he became like really liberal Muslim. So that he, at the time, he was very anti-evolution, and I just thought he was doing all these he was basically, a lot of his stuff was copying William Lane Craig, like word for word almost. So I didn't know who William Lane Craig was. I just bumped into these guys in the street basically and thought, that's not right, And so I literally just posted a video to respond to them. I mean, I didn't really even imagine anyone even watch it, quite frankly.
Did you have any expertise at all? I mean, what was your background?
No. Right. I didn't have any expertise. My background was in financial economics. That was what I'm educated in, master's degree. Although I do think there are similarities actually we use some of the same maths as physics and cosmology, a lot of similar techniques, Monte Carlo simulations and things like that. And actually, I do think there are similarities between economics and evolution, because the way complexity arises in economics is actually very similar to the way it arises in biological systems. So complex systems, I think there is a similarity there. But anyway, so I just could see that he was misquoting all the, it's the same misquoting Stephen Jay Gould and all the same sort of tropes. So I just put a video out pointing this out. And then he actually had it taken down by YouTube. And so we got in a bit of a fight, and it actually got, quite heated. And then he sort of disappeared for a bit. And then he reappeared with his own institute and hosted a thing saying, have Muslims misunderstood evolution? And he invited a bunch of pro-evolution Muslims to this event, which I thought was great. I thought, wow, brilliant. But then the sort of, he got banned, I think, or there was some action taken against him. The local Muslim societies at the university was going to host this out. I can't remember, maybe it was Queen's. I can't remember where it was. But anyway, wherever it was, he got in trouble with them. So he went more and more into the moderate camp, and then sort of put out sort of anti-extremist stuff. So he had a journey that maybe I contributed a little bit, I'm sure there are many other factors. But so that's how I got started. And then with the and then he, did the Kalam argument. And I didn't even know that it was Craig's argument. I never heard of it named Craig, but I just thought it was obviously wrong, because I think even then I knew that, well, we don't think the Big Bang is the beginning of the universe anymore. It's a completely outdated view. So I sort of looked into that more. And then how I got involved with the cosmologists was because I'd always, I guess the reason I got involved in these debates in the first place was just origins is a fascinating topic to me. And I think that's really interesting. So even if there were no theist debates, I would still find this all fascinating. And a lot of my fascination has really nothing to do with these debates. It's just a fascinating topic. I went back to college to study astronomy, and I wanted to do my project on early universe and learn more and more about it. But it's hard, it's hard to learn all this stuff. And I was discussing on physics forums. I always have questions on physics forums, trying to get my knowledge up more and more. And I sort of had almost like a mentor, a guy called Marcus. I don't know what his real name was. That's what he went by on the forums, but he was like beloved on the forums. Everyone thought this guy was amazing. He knew everything. He would also take the time to answer everyone's questions. And he was very interested in loop quantum gravity, which is an alternative to string theory.
In fact, so loop quantum gravity is something I bring in to play as a potential. It's probably outdated now, but at the time of writing this, as a potential alternative to Craig's theorizing about the beginning of the universe and there being a sort of definite.
Well, that would be loop quantum cosmology, which is a sort of spin-off.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Gravity, yeah. So I was very fascinated by that, and I had lots more questions. And I did mention, I think, to Marcus, there should be something on YouTube explaining it all for the lay person, and there wasn't anything. And I waited for someone to make it, and no one ever did. And then from my recollection, although it's a long time ago now, so I could be misremembering, he suggested, well, if you want to see this, why don't you just make it? Grab a camera and go and interview these guys. So I thought, why not? So that's what I did. And that, I didn't really have any clue what I was doing in terms of filmmaking, but I went and interviewed them, and the video was extremely popular. I think it's 400,000 views last time I looked at that video. And the sound was terrible. We used like a remote, we didn't use radio mics, but there was a room with air conditioning on. We didn't, it was terrible. I mean, it wasn't very well made. Eventually we remade it because as things went on, and I then sort of did more and more of it, learned how to make films, and got things better. And eventually we did a kind of remake of it, which I'm very proud of, and I think looks fantastic. I'm really, really proud of that film. So that's kind of how things happened, basically.
So then I suppose, did you inch into the world of theoretical physicists To
Yeah.
to the point
Basically,
where people actually knew who you were to some
yeah.
degree.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened. So after we did the loop one, I got in contact with Roger Penrose, but I can't remember how it happened actually. But by Ashtekar, who's the main sort of leader of the, well, I don't know, leader, one of the main leading figures in loop quantum gravity was Roger Penrose's postdoc. So that, and in fact, I had a lovely lunch one time, me and Abai and Roger, which was something like, wow. So I got to know everyone, and then we talked to Roger about doing a film about his CCC model, and then he invited me to a conference about it, and I met lots of other physicists, and then
Wow.
you know,
So
it just snowballed. It just snowballed. You know,
brilliant.
oh, I've spoken to him. I've spoken to, you know, I think Roger obviously knew Abai, and you know, then I spoke to Roger. So then we got Alan Guth. And then once we had Alan Guth, Stephen Hawking, you know, and it just went on and on and on from there. Yeah.
And you're effectively some sort of random guy, really, who's an outsider coming in and
yeah, very much so. But I think in some way, yeah, there is a bit of imposter syndrome going on there. But in some ways, I think being an outsider is helpful because I just read a book called Conversation in Quantum Gravity.
Yeah.
So it's interviews with all of the leading people working in quantum gravity. The person that wrote that book is someone that works in quantum gravity. And if you don't work in quantum gravity, that book is incomprehensible.
Yeah.
You know, so this is the problem, that people are in the field often when they write, not always, but often it's sort of incomprehensible.
This is the importance of science communicators, where you
and of course there are people that do a really good job in doing science communication. But no one was really doing what I was doing, I think, which is, you know, sort of specializing in a particular topic and interviewing all of the main people in that topic. Because a lot of people, they do have expertise and they do their own vlogs and so on, and it's them talking to camera, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. But obviously I wasn't going to do that because I'm not an expert. So, but I can go and interview these people. So, and that's what I did.
Which, you know, and what you've provided to be able to put that on YouTube that's free to view for everyone is an immense repository of knowledge that is, I mean, that's a fantastic, this is where the internet is brilliant, isn't it? So this is where you know, you can do a service, literally you are doing a service to humanity. Like, it sounds really grandiose, but there's some element where do you know what, you are genuinely providing something. Half the people that watch those videos, I'm sure, aren't going to buy books by those physicists and read up on their latest theories. But if you can provide a more understandable way of delivering that knowledge to the general public, then that's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, some of our videos had more than 1 million views, and I can assure you that the books that these people have written do not have more than 1 million.
No, there you go. I mean, I've watched most of your videos, I'm sure, and I don't think I've bought a single book by any of the given interviewees. So there you go. That says it all. So there's so many questions that can come out of this, but I suppose the first one would be, how do you think this all pertains to, for example, atheism, theism?
Okay, so I think obviously the very word theist is a very broad word.
Yeah.
So it depends what type of theist you are. So obviously, if you're a biblical literalist, then clearly contemporary cosmology is not going to be friendly to you. And there, you know, so that's obvious.
But does that mean that a biblical literalist, so a young earth creator, I mean, my opinion nowadays is don't bother arguing with the young earth creationists, because they're almost operating on a different paradigm, a different almost like intellectual dimension. So that I think it depends on the nature of if they're just like crazy, you know. But there are some that will try and use science, so I wouldn't mind engaging with them. But for those that just say you can't believe anything science says, and obviously there's no point. Yeah, the entire discipline. It's almost as if that cadre of people is saying that entire discipline, all those physicists, those great physicists that you've interviewed, that in those entire disciplines, it's all just pointless.
I mean, it wouldn't just be cosmology that's wrong, you know. biology, geology. I mean, there would be so pretty much any, all of our science would have to be thrown out.
But sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, so I think so. That's obvious. Now, the one that obviously the more sophisticated theologians do not believe in young Earth creationism, and they try and argue there are things in cosmology that actually point towards the existence of God, and I think that's wrong. So we can go over why if you want. Maybe you want to say that to later. I don't know, but yeah. So on the face of it, they do present, I think, convincing arguments. They're not really convincing because it's only on the face of it. As long as you dig a bit deeper, you realise that it's all a house of cards. But I do think that someone could be persuaded, but I'm not sure anyone is persuaded by them. But what they might do, I don't know if they persuade an atheist to become a theist, but what they might do is maybe persuade someone who's wavering in their belief to be a bit more firm.
Yeah, I think they become post hoc rationalizations, these sorts of.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Yeah.
I think broadly people assent to theism probably out of psychological thing, like, social networks, how they're brought up, what communities they live in, and then moral arguments broadly, which have emotional dimensions to
I don't know though. I mean, I do think the design argument is a power. But when I speak to theists, they do. It's the most quoted argument that I hear is the design argument, and then probably,
But again, do you think people have actually assented to that position of theism because of the design argument? Do you think that's?
Well, obviously, I think statistically speaking, most people have the same religion as their parents.
Yeah.
So that tells you everything you need to know about how people form their religious belief as a whole.
Yeah.
But of course, that doesn't mean that's true for everybody. Obviously, it's not going to be true for everyone. So why people, what arguments people do find convincing, from my own discussions with theists, I've found that people tend to quote the design argument, and I have heard a lot of people quote the Kalam argument to me.
Yeah, it's
for those that are obviously educated in these sorts of discourse.
It's a very popular argument. So I mean, just to the argument it can be formulated in different ways, and interestingly, William Lane Craig has changed how he formulates it now. So he's got an updated version, but in its sort of original form, it's whatever begins to exist has a cause for its existence. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause for its existence. Or shortened version of that, or slightly long version of that. But that's broadly how most people see the Kalam. What would you say initially? Because for you, so when I wrote this book, I concentrated on literally every sentence. You can write 150 page book on just 3 lines. It's bizarre, but the whatever begins to exist has a cause for its existence is incredibly interesting from a load of different points of view. For example, a chair beginning to exist already existed in all its constituent parts. It was just formulated into that particular shape. So what really began to exist? Was it just the idea of a chair? So we get onto this idea of so I'm a conceptual nominalist, and that's all really interesting, but probably not doesn't float your boat as much, which is you seem to be much more interested in the universe began to exist, the second premise.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the question see, the thing is, when people debate the Kalam, that I was just extremely frustrated, to be honest, listening to philosophers debate the Kalam and just buying this premise that the universe began to exist.
Yeah.
Well, there's no evidence that the universe began to exist. Now, people think that there is, and it's not just theists that have created this misconception. A lot of physicists have created this misconception, and they talk about the universe having a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, I'm not disputing that there was a Big Bang, but what I think is the consensus view amongst cosmologists today, and we've tried to some extent document that, is that no one thinks that the Big Bang was really the beginning. Now, they did have good reason to think so, but now they don't, basically. So maybe I should just go into that a bit more.
Yeah, please do.
So let's just go a little bit of the history of this. Why did we think the Big Bang was the beginning, and why don't we think that now? So what happened was, when relativity was invented in 1915, was it? 1915, I think it was. Yeah. So general relativity.
And what would general relativity say broadly?
So yeah, so it wasn't until the 1920s that Alexander Friedman and Georges Lemaitre really sort of showed that the universe has to be either expanding or contracting. It can't really sit still. It's very difficult to make it sit still, basically. And Lemaitre very much pushed the idea that it was expanding. And, quite quickly there was some observational evidence that it was expanding in the form of the Hubble redshift relationships, i.e. that if you look at galaxies, they seem to be moving away from us on average. And the further away you look, the faster away they're looking, which is very consistent with an expanding universe. So I think it was Friedman who first showed that this would lead, if you trace it back in time, you get to a singularity where the density, curvature, temperature, pressure, all these things, they all become infinite. So you can no longer sort of keep extrapolating backwards in time. That in a finite amount of time, all these values become infinite. So it's interpreted as time just sort of stops. And Lemaitre had this phrase of a day without a yesterday. But these singularity theorems had a very unreasonable assumption, which was that the universe was perfectly symmetrical, which is obviously not true. Because obviously, we live on the Earth, which is denser than the surrounding space. It isn't perfectly symmetrical. So most people at the time didn't take these theorems very seriously. And then in the 1960s, Hawking and Penrose came along, and they showed that the assumption of perfect symmetry doesn't matter, that the conclusion is the same. You can relax that assumption, and you will still get a singularity, either in a black hole or at the Big Bang. So then, people started to assume, okay, well, the universe must have had a beginning then. Space-time comes to an end in a black hole when it had a beginning at the Big Bang. And that is what the situation was when William Lane Craig wrote the book Kalam, Cosmological Argument in 1979. So pretty much everyone took that view, and that was the consensus view. Now, what's interesting is that at the time, in the 50s, let's say at the time, in the 1950s, Lemaitre
before time.
Lemaitre had a bit of a bust up with the Pope, because Lemaitre was the one pushing the Big Bang, and he was at the time sort of fighting with opponents of the steady state theorem, which said that you can interpret the expansion of the universe as not having a beginning, that there's sort of continual creation of matter, so the Pope wanted to use the Big Bang as evidence for God and saying, it proves Genesis. And Lemaitre, who was a Catholic priest as well as a very, very good cosmologist, said, no, don't do that. Now you might think, hang on, that's surprising. Why wouldn't a Catholic priest that is one of the founding fathers of the Big Bang Theory not want to use it to shore up his Catholic faith? And he was very much of the opinion that no, that our faith is independent of these sorts of questions. And also you cannot exclude the idea that there wasn't a pre-Big Bang phase. So even though he did use the phrase "a day without yesterday," he was very much open to the idea that it wasn't actually that there might have been a pre-Big Bang phase. And so he was very much against that, and he would have argued with Craig for sure. But Craig decided to ignore, Lemaitre's advice of not involving the Big Bang with theological discussions. And so he very much sort of came out and said, no, this supports the Kalam cosmological argument. Ironically, it was the very year that he published his book that the first evidence that this was not going to work came out, because at the same year, 79, inflationary cosmology came out. Now, it turns out that although the Penrose-Hawking singularity theorems don't have this assumption of perfect symmetry, they do have other assumptions. And one of the other assumptions is that sort of gravity is always attractive. But inflation came out in 79, and that showed that gravity is not always attractive. So straight away, there's an issue, but then I think what happened was, there are other assumptions as well. One is that you describe the space-time as what's called a Lorentzian manifold. And what that basically means in plain English is that there's three space dimensions, one time dimension, and there's also mass in the universe. So you can challenge that. There's an assumption there's no close time-like curves, which is the idea that space-time can look back on itself. You could challenge that. But I think the one that, the two that cosmology is sort of focused on, two assumptions in the Cosmological theorem, is one, this idea that gravity is always attractive. We've also since discovered dark energy, which is repulsive gravity. The other one is that general relativity describes the physics at the Big Bang, and virtually no one thinks that's true. And so therefore, you can't use the Big Bang as evidence that the universe had a beginning, because everyone thinks that quantum mechanics, well, I always say everyone, almost everyone, believes that quantum mechanics is going to change the description. Just like the Hawking radiation, think of it this way. If you think of a black hole entirely classically, nothing can escape a black hole. But when you bring quantum mechanics in, you find that something can escape the black hole. The conclusion is changed. So everyone thinks that the conclusion of the beginning of the universe is changed when you bring quantum mechanics in. Now the question then is, how is it changed? And that's up in the air because there's a lot of different competing models and we don't really know which one is right, if any of them are right. But there are some models that are certainly more developed than others. And what's interesting is that most of them tend to say the Big Bang was not the beginning. So I think...
So you have a period of... The way I understand it is you have a period where physics breaks down and therefore it's really difficult to make any kind of physical predictions. And then you have the beginning of inflation. So quite often when people say the Big Bang's a beginning, what they really mean, whether they know it or not, is that it's the beginning of inflation.
Yeah, so what happened was, I think the meaning of the Big Bang changed, particularly with respect to inflation. When inflation first came out, Alan Guth gave a talk and it was entitled, I think it was entitled 10 to the minus 35 seconds after the Big Bang. So inflation was considered something that happened after the Big Bang.
Yeah.
That talk was around about 1980. But as inflation was better understood, it became obvious that actually, when we think of what is all this evidence for the Big Bang, it's, the Hubble expansion, the cosmic microwave background, all these things. What is all that evidence really telling us? It's really telling us that the universe was in a very hot, dense state. Okay, was that state at the beginning? Well, if you believe in singularity theorems, yeah. But no one believes in singularity theorems. Now, what's interesting is that if you believe in inflation, then the universe was actually not hot during inflation. The universe, in some sense, was actually very, very cold. Right, so the universe is really cold in inflation. So then when inflation ends, it heats up. So this is called reheating, but really it should be called heating. There's no re about it. It's a stupid name, to be honest. So the universe heats up. So then you could say, okay, so if we say that the Big Bang is the statement that the universe was hot and dense, then inflation is before the Big Bang. It's not after the Big Bang, it's before the Big Bang. And in fact, now I think it's better to, and in fact, Alan Guth has called inflation a prequel to the Big Bang. So inflation happens before the Big Bang. So the Big Bang is not the beginning of the universe.
So this idea of a singularity at the Big Bang, and the idea that that's a finite beginning to the universe. So as you mentioned singularity theories, what percentage of physicists would you think assent to the idea that there was a finite beginning to the universe at some kind of singularity?
I would say at some kind of singularity, it would be practically zero. There might be one or two, of course, you can never say zero. But I would say it's a very broad consensus that there was no beginning at the singularity. Now, that doesn't mean there was no beginning.
Yeah.
Because you could imagine there's some other beginning that's not a singularity. So, a good example of this is Alex Vilenkin has a model which he calls creation from nothing. And there he imagines that the universe sort of quantum tunneled from a state where there's no space or time into a state where there was space and time. And that, I would say, is the beginning to the universe. And such a model is, on the table, shall we say?
Yeah.
But it's certainly not something that we know to be true.
I think I remember him talking about that, and then Craig followers getting onto that, but I don't know, vague memories.
Well, so many atheists have jumped on this idea of universal nothing as the sort of, that's our explanation for the universe. But I think they have overplayed that, because it's just one idea of many.
Yeah.
So I think we should be careful as not getting too enthusiastic that that this is the right description. It is an interesting model, and it might be right, but we certainly don't know it to be right. So there are models of the universe where there's a beginning, and but not a singularity. But the problem is, of course, these are quite speculative models, and the obviously those that want to argue for a beginning don't want to use such speculative models. They want to sort of claim that it's established physics, and they think the singularity is established physics. But the singularity is not established physics. It is something virtually no one in physics thinks is real.
Would you say that the current landscape of cosmologists and theoretical physicists is actually a whole myriad of different theories with no one leading contender, and certain theories use aspects of other theory? So inflation might be involved in all these theories. And
inflation, okay, so it depends what you mean. So obviously most cosmologists don't work in the early universe anyway.
Yeah.
So when someone says they're a cosmologist, the probability that they work on the Big Bang itself is very small. The vast majority of cosmologists are not.
That's an interesting point.
Involved in this field at all. Okay, so it's very important. A lot of them will talk about it, but it's actually not their area. So that's a very important point to make. So those that do work on this, now inflation is the leading candidate for what's called early universe cosmology. And the vast majority of cosmologists do sign up to inflation, but there's some that don't, that there are alternatives to inflation. But then even if there was inflation, you could still ask the question, what was before inflation? So, and that was probably going to get you into a quantum gravity description of the universe. So whether it's the Lenkin-Sunderling from nothing model, the Harter-Hawking model, loop quantum cosmology, various different proposals. So there's sort of two separate questions there. But they're not necessarily separate questions because, they can be sort of tied up with each other. You can have quantum gravity descriptions that try and be competitors to inflation and trying to seek to replace inflation together. So it depends on the sort of model that you're talking about.
So what sort of options are there? Imagine, this is for the absolute beginner, doesn't really understand anything. Yeah. So you've got a finite beginning to the universe as one kind of model, which might be beginning as something from nothing. So,
Well, that isn't the only option for a finite beginning model. Okay. So let's try and classify them. Okay, so one option is that the universe had a beginning. It's a completely open option. It might be right. Certainly, we don't want to say couldn't have happened. So, I mean, I guess you could. Maybe there are some people that think the singularity is real. They're realistic about the singularity. I mean, I'm not sure there are any, but maybe there are. So that I guess maybe that's an option. But then you've got these people sort of universal nothing, like Alex Valenkin's model. Then you have a notion where time disappears, but there's still something there, so we might think of time as some sort of emergent property. That's not necessarily from a singularity or even from nothing, so there are models of people are working on things where time is emergent or space-time is emergent. From something else more fundamental, some sort of quantum system. You can think also actually of,
so you would have, to understand that, you would have matter that existed Again,
not necessarily matter. There might be some sort of quantum field.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's
what do you mean
my
by
poor
matter?
choice of word. Something existed that was not just time. So some
well,
kind of
the question is, what do we mean by time? So there's a
Yeah.
question: what do we mean by time?
Yeah.
So one way to define time. This is something that Yasunori Nomura gave to me. He's the chair of the theoretical physics department at Berkeley, and he said time is a correlation between events. So you have to have something periodic. Like think of a pendulum. Okay, there's actually two types of pendulums you can think of, right? So one, if you just have one pendulum and it swings like this. Okay, now really weirdly, try and watch a video of two pendulums stuck together. Okay, what you'll see is they move crazily, like all kinds of random directions. You could not make a clock out of that kind of pendulum, right? But it doesn't mean there's nothing happening, right? You need some sort of periodic thing. That's why I think Nomura described it as a correlation between events, to have time, as we know it at least. So you then, you could imagine there are events without any correlations, and then correlations gradually increase, right? So time then becomes established, but there's not the case, there's no events happening, but you just can't, order them. So that's one idea, if you like, that space or space-time is emerging. And actually the Harter-Hawking model has something akin to this. It's not necessarily a model of emergent gravity, emergent space-time, which is another thing. But you do have a sort of state of the universe where there's no time. And then as the space increases in volume, the time emerges from it.
So would
you go from 4 space dimensions to 3 space dimensions and 1 time dimension. The time dimension sort of unfurled. So that's another option.
But would that be where that's happened for the first time, or is it incoherent to even say that, would that be?
Well, if there's no time.
Yeah, I know, and this is the problem. I was going to talk about how something existing before time had existed.
So it is complicated. Like in the Harter-Hawking model, there's actually 2 notions of time. So there's imaginary time and there's real time. So in imaginary time, the universe would have a beginning, but in real time, it actually doesn't have a beginning. So is the Harter-Hawking model a universe with a beginning or not? I think the answer is not clear. It's just sort of ambiguous. So there is, but I think that is a sort of a class of model you could talk about, that actually whether there's a beginning is somewhat ambiguous. So another example of a sort of ambiguity there is it with a closed time-like curve. Gott and Lee had this model where you've got these branching universes from inflation. So for those that don't know, inflation seems to predict a multiverse where there's sort of branching universes, many, many universes being created. And what Gott and Lee wanted to do was follow this back in time, and they suggested that at the, if you like, the bottom of the branch of the tree, there's a closed time-like curve, so where time moves back on itself. Now, if you think about that, I just ask you, is a circle infinite in length? Well, no, it's not, right? But where's the beginning of the circle? We don't have one. So here's a model that doesn't have a beginning, but isn't infinite in the past either, right? Why? Because it's a circle. A circle is, that's their property.
Yeah. And then, of course, there are these ideas that universes could be past eternal. With
that's another possibility.
Time.
So there's two, at least 2, probably more than 2. There's so many different ideas out there. But one idea is that the universe is cyclic, and another is that it's not cyclic, but that you might have something like an hourglass universe where there's what you might call a one-time bounce. So maybe it contracted, got to a maximum density, and then expanded back out again. So we're just living in the expanding branch, but there's a contracting branch.
But there would be a finite beginning at the beginning of the hourglass, or is that just an unknown?
Let's put it this way: if we travelled into the far future of our branch, we'll never get to an end.
Right.
Okay. Similarly, if you were in the other branch, you will never get to an end either, going the other way. So it's not that there's a beginning and then it contracts and then expands. It's that there is no beginning.
So people like William Lane Craig would then start talking about, Hilton's hotels and infinities being.
Yeah, I mean, that's all just nonsense as far as I'm concerned. I mean, no, he basically, I think that, there's nothing incoherent about infinity as a concept. Hilbert Hotel does not establish that infinity is incoherent.
Yeah, Hilbert. Sorry.
That's just not true. It's just not correct. It's certainly unintuitive. And in fact, interestingly, Alex Malpass debated Bill Craig, and he said, look, yeah, these things about Hilbert's hotels are sort of counterintuitive. They sound crazy, but same way quantum mechanics sounds crazy, but, it just means that it's unintuitive. It's not actually, there's no literal contradiction. Now, Craig's response was, oh yeah, but you can have models of quantum mechanics that have causality in them. So no, that's not a good counter. And Alex, is a brilliant philosopher, but he doesn't like to get engaged with physics debates, and fair enough, it's not his field, But what I think he should have said was, but hang on, Bill, you subscribe to the pilot wave theory of quantum mechanics, and that also has very counterintuitive notions in it. It loses locality. And in fact, I believe it was Tim Maudlin wrote an article saying whatever interpretation of quantum mechanics you have, you are going to be in conflict with intuitive notions of space and time and causality. So he was wrong in the way that he responded to Alex. And so these notions of infinity and these crazy things about, you can get more guests in even when the hotel is full. I mean, that's just appealing to your intuitions. And of course, your intuitions are about finite things because, everything we encounter is finite. So, of course, you don't have any sort of built-in intuitions about infinity, just as we don't have intuitions about quantum mechanics or, relativistic effects, because we don't live in a world where we travel close to the speed of light. Hence time dilation and relativity is unintuitive to us. But all these things about infinity that he raises are just really saying, they're just appealing to your intuitions. And of course you have intuitions about finite things. So I don't think any of those arguments work.
Yeah, because I remember you brought this up in your recent conversation with Roger Penrose and Alan Guth, two great minds. And
I have to say props to you because this was important. Go on.
No. Well, I was just going to say, because I then contacted you to say I felt a little bit like they didn't give the infinity arguments enough respect, and therefore didn't deal with any decent refutations thereof. But what you're now saying is actually it doesn't really deserve respect because it's almost...
That was so this is really interesting, and it is a little bit disappointing that not many atheists have picked up on this. You did, so props to you. But very few, virtually no others have. In fact, I might be right to say no others have. That here I am sort of presenting the Kalam argument to two of the biggest names in physics.
Yeah.
Two people that Craig has quoted to support his case, and they were so unbelievably dismissive of it. They didn't even really want to give it the time of day. They were just like, this doesn't need to be taken seriously. That's why they didn't provide a really robust response, because they didn't think it deserved a robust response. It was such a, lame argument. And that is really telling, in my opinion. And, well done for you to pick up on that. But again, most atheists have not picked up on it.
Yeah. And I didn't quite know, because on the one hand, I wanted them to give just a slam dunk refutation of a sort of Craigian style of, infinity argument. And so I was disappointed in that. But then now I understand, obviously, in the context of like, well, it's not a thing. It's not. This isn't a problem for me. It's not, whatever.
Well, basically, Craig's argument is, well, Hilbert's hotel is absurd. But what does it mean to say it's absurd? It basically means that it doesn't conform with my intuitions about what should happen.
Yeah.
But why should you have intuitions about the infinite? Why should I trust your intuitions about the infinite? And in fact, he speaks to a mathematician. They won't say to you that Hilbert's hotel is like leading you to a contradiction. They don't say that.
Yeah.
But,
Well, I mean, infinities are
Not you,
used in certain axiomatic frameworks of mathematics, right? So they are, which you might say, well, how can you use infinity to plug into some kind of understanding of mathematical? I don't want to say reality, but
yeah. Well, okay. So yeah, infinity is used in mathematics all the time, and vast majority of mathematicians don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
That's a broad consensus in mathematics, so it's a perfectly rational concept.
So you've got.
Now, of course,
sorry, Karen.
Craig will try and say, well, it depends what audience he's speaking to. If he's speaking to some audiences, to say it's a literal contradiction, and then when he's speaking to a philosopher, say, no, it's not a contradiction; it's a metaphysical absurdity. So literally, he's contradicting himself, because in some sense he'll say it's a contradiction, and in others he doesn't. Yeah. He says it isn't. So he's literally contradicting himself. Ironically,
or he's just being a sneaky spin doctor. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but if you take the totality of his statement,
yes,
they are literal contradictions.
Yeah.
Because it can't be a contradiction and not a contradiction.
Yeah, absolutely. No, sure.
Yeah.
But yes, so you have of these options then, so you have your singularity or finite beginning in some way.
Yeah.
And you've got maybe an hourglass understanding of time coming into, or there's a pinch point going on in the middle, but then you've got infinite future and infinite past.
Mm-hmm.
But then you would have some form of cyclical universe that has, where time might start again, if you like, for want of a better phrase.
Oh my God, you're with my wife on this one.
What?
I really want to oppose what you say there. See, I think it's cyclical.
She thinks cyclical. You said cyclical earlier, and I was like, yeah.
And
straight away,
I thought it was an American-British thing, but maybe now you're saying cyclical. Yeah. Maybe I'm mistaken about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would almost certainly say you're wrong, but what am I to say?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, no. So yeah, I then you get these different, and I'm sure there are various different models of a cyclical universe. I mean,
there are different ones,
and you used to have some which have now been pretty much debunked. And these ideas of the Big Crunch and the Big Bang, and certain models. Hang
on. So,
I mean, there are loads. The point is, there are loads of different options. Talk us through that. Talk us through different.
Well, okay, so yeah, there are different versions of a cyclic universe. I can think of many. So the traditional one is just expand, contract, expand, contract. Now people think that's been ruled out because of dark energy. So dark energy is whatever it is, it's causing the universe to accelerate in its expansion. And if it's accelerating in its expansion where there's not enough matter then to pull it back in, so it will just expand forever.
Which is why people favor a heat death of the universe.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's wrong in my opinion.
Right.
It's a wrong thing.
Tell us why.
It's wrong because you're assuming dark energy is a cosmological constant, but we don't know that. It might be a cosmological constant, and probably it's a reasonable bet. If you're given even odds and asked bet on a cosmological constant or not, I think probably I would bet on a cosmological constant. But that's not very good evidence that it is a cosmological constant. It might not be. So if it's not a constant, then it could change over time. And in fact, there are only two predictions, no, maybe three predictions. But one of the predictions that the cosmological constant was what it was made from causal set by Raphael Sorkin in respect of what's called causal set theory. And that predicts that the cosmological constant changes over time. So it doesn't necessarily tell us that model of the cyclic universe is ruled out. And there are other reasons to think that the dark energy might not be constant. We have this Hubble tension, which is different measurements of the Hubble constant. We've got two very, very good ways to measure the Hubble constant, which is the rate of expansion of the universe, and they don't agree. And it's a problem. Now it could just be that there's some instrument, systemic. There's some measuring errors, basically. That's possible, and probably the smart money is on that. But it might not be. It could be some new physics, which might mean dark energy is not a cosmological constant. So there's something called the Swampland conjecture of string theory that would probably also imply that dark energy is not a cosmological constant. So it might be the case that it's not a cosmological constant, and then it could change, and then the universe could recontract. So I don't think the discovery of dark energy rules out even that model of a cyclic universe. But of course, there are other models of a cyclic universe which, like Roger Penrose's CCC model, assumes it is a cosmological constant. And then there are other models which assume that not only is it not going to get smaller and become negative, which is what you would need for the traditional cyclic universe, but there are other models where it's actually more energetic than a cosmological constant. It's not going to decay away and become negative, but actually get stronger and stronger.
Right.
And then the universe can rip into shreds, as it were. And there are models where the remnants of those shreds become new universes. So that's called the bound fountain model. So there are all kinds of cyclic models with various different assumptions about what the cosmological constant is. And there's certainly no reason to think that these are sort of ruled out by. I think people just think, the traditional notion of expansion contraction, and if that contraction is just caused by the fact that there's too much mass in the universe, right? That was the original idea, that there would be enough matter to slow the expansion down and cause it to recollapse. So that is ruled out. But what comes with what we ruled out was this notion of dark energy, and then dark energy could be all kinds of different things, which could lead you to a cyclic universe. So really, cyclic universe is not ruled out.
Yeah. And that would broadly, I mean, I don't know that there are any other types of universe that you could conceptually present that don't fall into the ones that we've just talked about, which are either cyclic, past eternal, past eternal in some sense, past future as well, or starting with a finite.
Well, as I said, I think there's also some where it's somewhat ambiguous whether you talk about a beginning or not. So the example I gave was the Harter-Hawking model, where it has a beginning in real time, in imaginary time, but not in real time.
Yeah.
So is that a universe with a beginning or not? I'm not sure. I think there's some ambiguity. And similarly with the closed time-like curve model of Bott and Lee, where it is not infinite into the past, but there's no beginning point. I mean, you could say the same with the Harter-Hawking model, right? Even in the imaginary time direction, because there's no beginning point, but it's not infinite into the past in the imaginary time.
So, bearing in mind that you're just one person with one person's views, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I'd be interested what you think the best theory is with your present knowledge and why. And then I also wonder whether you are biased with what you want to be true, and is that informing you with a confirmation bias that we could also accuse anyone of having? For example, William Lane Craig, is he ascribing more value to the evidence that supports his cosmological viewpoint because it conforms with his idea of how the universe works, or what his worldview is? So what do you think is the best theory going around at the moment, and why? And how do you deal with confirmation bias?
So when you say theory of what the Big Bang, whether the universe was eternal into the past or not?
Or what the best theory of everything?
Well, that's too broad a question. Let's focus on whether the universe was eternal into the past or not. Why don't we?
Okay.
And I am open-minded about it. I think, the thing that I think keeps popping up there is that there was a bounce. There was a collapsing universe and then an expanding universe. That keeps popping up a lot. So I would give that high credence. But there is also a notion of maybe space-time is sort of emergent. That's coming up a lot now as well. So I'm open-minded about it. I really don't. I'd love to know whether the universe had a beginning or not, or whether there was some third option. We talked about, maybe it's somewhat ambiguous. I just want to know the answer. But what annoys me about Craig is that he pretends that we know the answer and we don't. And to me, that's where my video series and these debates intersect, because I think is whether the universe had a beginning, or even if we can't know whether it had a beginning or not, but what happened at the Big Bang is incredibly fascinating. And I think there's all sorts of exciting ideas. Maybe one of them is right. It's always possible none of them are right. So this is really fascinating, and I love the frontier of science, and that's where things are really exciting, right? Obviously, where things we know with very high confidence. There was a debate about whether Andromeda Nebula was a galaxy or not, and now that debate is settled. So it's not a very exciting question. So where we're at the frontier of science, that's where the excitement is, in my opinion. And the Big Bang is the frontier of science, and it's an incredibly exciting question. But then when I hear people like William Lane Craig who sort of imply, oh, we know the answer, the universe had a beginning, no, we don't know the answer. So I try and keep an open mind about whether it had a beginning or not, whether there was a bounce or whether there was something else. I would just say I'm open-minded about it.
Yeah.
Hopefully one day these data will unambiguously tell us what happened. And I think, that's not impossible. I mean, it might not tell us the ultimate beginning, but at least maybe that, I'm not optimistic that we'll know about that, but it might tell us, kind of what happened at the Big Bang. I think there's a prospect for that. It's not going to be easy.
Yeah, because there's an interesting whole other debate about the limits to knowledge, about are we living in a Goldilocks knowledge zone where actually this is the best time to be able to find out about the universe, and as it expands, actually we'll be less able to find out about the past in the same way that we can right now, and maybe there are just certain things we are literally cannot discover.
It could be that we'll never know the answer to these questions.
Which humans are great at that. We're great at. I mean, so one of the conclusions to the Kalam book that I wrote, and a few. I mean, it's generally really broadly well accepted, this book. But one thing that some atheists said were you weren't strong enough in the conclusions at the end to say it's just a load of rubbish, as in. What I said is broadly what you were saying there, which is, aside from all the philosophical arguments that I talk about, and nominalism against realism, all these things, but talking about the science of the universe, is that I'm not going to present to Craig an alternative hypothesis and say this is true.
No. So that's important, because what he does this little trick, which is says, none of these other models have proved that the universe is past eternal, But if you're a critic of the Kalam, there's no obligation for you to prove that the universe is past eternal. All you have to show is that the proof that the universe is past finite is not a valid proof. You don't have to prove the opposite.
Yeah.
So when he'll go into these models that they haven't established the eternity of the past, so what? I mean, that's just such a point. They don't need to.
So what Craig should be being is agnostic about, like you're saying, that actually, I mean, your answer is brilliant, which is to say, do you know what? There are a bunch of theories out there. I'm not going to die on any hill of any of the theories. They're all interesting. Some of them might have a little bit more persuasiveness for me, but it's too open at the moment to be able to put all my eggs in a particular basket, which is basically what Craig should be saying. But instead, because he's got an agenda, he needs so one of the chapters in here is written by a friend of mine, counter apologist, he's known as online, which is about how Craig adopts the neo-Lorentzian model, and he basically massages his understanding of certain science to fit his model, and he'll cherry pick his science to fit his model.
Completely. Because in fact, the how does he conform? So he needs the neo. So let's explain to the viewers that aren't necessarily familiar with neo-Lorentzianism. So it's basically an interpretation of relativity where there is a preferred frame, which is against. Is that? I mean, you.
What does that mean, though? But what does that mean? So he needs the way.
So basically, there's no in relativity. There's no absolute simultaneity. You can't say there's some time that exists. There's no unique now to the universe. People have different clocks, basically, and they cannot be synchronized.
So time is relative in the way that we understand it, depending on what you are and where you are. And, whereas Craig.
Why is this important to the Kalam? Because
an absolute time.
because he needs an absolute time.
Yeah, where you've got this objective clock that goes through the universe in some sense.
But there's no such notion in relativity. So he has to reinterpret relativity to bring it back in. The problem is, how does he square? He's then using relativity, like in the Borde-Guthrie-Vilenka theorem, which requires there to be the symmetries of relativity. So how does he square these things? I have no idea, because as far as I can see, he's never shown how they can be squared. Because, like, particularly Borde-Guthrie-Vilenka theorem requires the symmetries of relativity, which Craig denies.
So yeah, it falls apart. So basically, my conclusions were you're cherry picking science. I mean, there's a whole lot of philosophical issues I have over here, but let's park that. As far as the science of cosmology is concerned, you're cherry picking your science. You're demanding things that don't look like they are established. And
he hides that as well. Like, if you watch the presentations he gives to the public, I mean, in more philosophical literature, he will obviously admit that he needs this neo, and he is quite rigorous there, at least in the sense that he admits that he needs this, right? So that's fair, props to him for that. But at the same time, when he's giving talks to the public, he will not admit that his view is in complete contradiction to the vast majority of physicists.
Yeah.
He will paint a picture that it's, I'm just going with standard physics back to the beginning. Where he isn't, and he knows that he isn't, right? He knows that he is in contrary to what the vast majority of physicists think, right? And he'll admit that in his technical writings, in a philosophical journal or whatever. But when he gives a presentation to a layperson audience, he's not going to say, by the way, guys, this view requires a very non-standard interpretation of relativity that virtually no one in the physics community accepts. And in fact, just to give you an example of how loosely accepted it is, if you go on physics forums, which is a really great resource, if you want to learn about physics and want to have discussions with people who are very knowledgeable, it's very robust. They have a very good editorial policy there. And in fact, part of that editorial policy is they will not allow discussions of neo-relativity interpretation of relativity.
It's
just how fringe it is considered.
Yeah. So therefore,
I mean, really, it's fine to take a fringe view. There's nothing wrong with taking a fringe view. There are open questions in relativity, how to mix it with quantum mechanics, and it could be that you reintroduce these neo-Lorentzian views. That is completely fine. But the difficulty then is, how do you square that with something like Borde-Guthrie-Vilenka theorem, which requires it?
Yeah.
That's the problem.
It's the web when you tell one lie, you get into these Weber lies. When you make one kind of false move and then you're using that to make other assumptions, and then you just get this web of contradiction and web of special pleading and double standards. And I think that's where Craig is at with the Kalam. And I think that realistically he should be just agnostic about the universe.
But we all should be. There are certain questions that are still open questions, and whether the universe had a beginning, whether the Big Bang was the singularity, these are all open questions. Yeah. So we should all be agnostic about open questions. Absolutely. But that doesn't mean, you couldn't have your favorite model, that's fine. People place bets on what ones they think are likely to be true. There's nothing wrong with that. And of course, scientists have to pick their favorite models because they have to work on them and develop them. And you're not going to work on a development model that you don't think has much chance of being right. Yeah. So that's all fine. But that's very different to what Craig is doing.
Absolutely. So just to start wrapping up things, what do you think will be the next big discovery, or where do you think a discovery could be in cosmology?
I think the really exciting thing in cosmology today is gravitational wave astronomy. This is a completely new field now. So
explain.
We've had astronomy with telescopes since 1610. And that's all getting light into a telescope.
So that's an optical map. You're building up a visual map of the universe from light.
Yeah, well, of course, there are different types of light that aren't necessarily in a visible part of the spectrum. So X-rays and gamma rays and so on, but they're all light basically. Yeah. Now, as of about 5 years ago, we've got a completely new type of probe into the universe, which is gravitational waves. And we have just started on that journey, that we've taken the first step. You know, there are so many more steps to take on that. So one is to build much bigger and better and more sensitive ground-based gravitational wave detectors. And that is, you know, there are proposals on the table for that. And then there is putting gravitational wave detectors in space. So there's a project called LISA. But beyond LISA, there are probes that will go, you know, even more sensitive into different frequency ranges. And the reason why this is so exciting for these sorts of questions is that if we want to probe the universe with light, we are stuck, because the universe was not transparent to light before what's called the decoupling period. So basically, the universe, for about 380,000 years after the Big Bang, the universe was like a plasma which you cannot see through. So think of the sun as a plasma. You can see the surface of the sun, but you can't see the core, not in light at least. So how could you get any information about what happened before 380,000 years after the Big Bang? Well, there are patterns in the cosmic microwave background that you can use to infer things. That's one thing you can do. But there are things that will travel through. Think of it as a wall. The cosmic microwave background is like a wall. Yeah. And you cannot see through the wall. But there are some things that can go through the wall. There are two things that can go through the wall, basically. So one is neutrinos. And neutrinos, probably you could probe so the CMB is 380,000 years after the Big Bang. Neutrinos would be something like 1 second after the Big Bang. So if you could detect the cosmic neutrino background, that would be really impressive. But I think that's very hard to do. The reason these things are hard to do is basically the reason that they give you the information. They're able to go through the wall because they interact so weakly with everything. Right? Yeah, so and that means they're going to interact very weakly, because so detecting them is going to be really hard, because they interact weakly with your detectors as well, right? Then even before the cosmic neutrino background, there's gravitational waves, and that potentially you could literally, in some sense, see the Big Bang, but you would need a very ambitious gravitational wave detector, and there is a plan to build such a detector. It is obviously just on the drawing board. It's called the Big Bang Observer. And that's basically like
nice. LISA. Let's call it what we want it to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's basically like LISA times 4. You need basically something, well, kind of. So LISA is being built right now. That is happening. And it's scheduled to be launched, I'm not quite sure exactly when, probably end of this decade, beginning of next one, something like that. That will be incredibly exciting. But Big Bang Observer, if you like, it's even more ambitious than LISA, and that could potentially let us see the Big Bang, and it would give us a lot of information about what happened.
Okay, and then just sort of finally, what future interviews have you got lined up, or any ideas? Is there something that you haven't yet done, or someone you haven't yet spoken to who you think that's someone I need to speak to?
Okay, so what can I tell you? So. Okay, one thing I can tell you that I'm working on now is the new Kalam video. So back many years ago, we made a video about the Kalam argument, and it was the most popular video on YouTube critiquing the Kalam. Unfortunately, we used footage from BBC, and they took it down. So, mind you, having said that, it's very old, and you know, so I'm making a new version of that. So I'm excited about that. I also I'm doing a sort of debate show. So we did the first one, which was Anna Booth and Roger Penrose. I'm trying to organise the next one, but it's proving difficult because getting people to agree to things is hard.
Especially, do you think there's an element of them really not happy to be challenged on their cherished viewpoints by someone?
Yeah, I think that might be true, but also they have to know the other person's thing. And the thing is, in science tends to be knowledge is very specialized.
Yeah.
So if you ask, okay, talk to me about your thing, the people are happy to do that. If you say, well, there's some rival thing, they not only have to know their thing, they have to know the rival in order to critique. And that's why actually a lot of atheists do badly in debates with Earth creationists or with other apologetics, because they get lazy and they just say, well, that's some nonsense. I'm not going to do my homework and make sure I know these arguments and what the flaws are. They don't do their homework, and often they come off badly. And I think that's why Bill Craig wins a lot of debates. So that might be an issue there. And then the third thing I'm very excited about, I can't tell you about at the moment because, well, it's something with not on YouTube. It's with a major media outlet, I should say. But I can't say what it is not because we've said keep it secret, because we haven't made any agreement about when we're going to announce it. Yeah. So that is my main focus at the moment. And most of the time I'll be working on this project, but I can't say.
Oh, that sounds brilliant. It
is something really exciting when it comes out. I can't wait to tell you all about it. It's going to be something really exciting.
Well, look,
I just can't tell you about it yet.
Yeah. I really appreciate the time you spent with me today. I think we just dipped our toe into a bit of cosmology, and perhaps a future conversation we might be able to expand on a couple of the ideas if you're willing. But also maybe because I know that you did a lot of work on suffering and animal suffering with regard to the argument.
Yeah. So this I think it's like the cosmology stuff doesn't really prove theism wrong. It basically is a response. They're trying to use it to prove theism right. Yeah. And we're trying to say, no, it doesn't. You can't.
Yeah. So that's what I said.
That's not really an argument against the falsity of certain religious beliefs. But I think the argument from animal suffering is the strongest argument against a benevolent God. And so that is something of interest to me as well. Also for the same reason, because William Lane Craig makes false statements about the science of this, and he's got the science wrong.
I've noticed what he does often is hold up other people's work when he's not an expert on it, and use that as a kind of like, I don't need to expand on this any further. You need to go to this. So he'll hold up like Murray's book, wasn't it, on suffering?
Yeah, and he'll say published by Oxford University Press, as if that means it's endorsed by the whole of Oxford University. Yeah, Oxford University is just a publishing company that Oxford University owns. Yeah. And he does that. He does that.
He used to do that a lot because he doesn't debate so much anymore. But he used to do that a lot with Paul Copan's book, "Is God a Moral Monster?" When people would challenge him on the Old Testament, usually in Q&A sessions of a debate, he would say, "I'm not going to answer that. You need to go and read Paul Copan's Is God a Moral Monster?" And with animal suffering, you need to go and read this. Okay, fair enough, but.
But with there it's a bit different. The animal suffering thing is a bit different because he was like, neuroscience has shown, read Michael Murray's book, published by Oxford University Press, and it's like, neuroscience is endorsing this view, Oxford University are endorsing this view. It's like, well, hang on, Michael Murray is not a neuroscientist, right? And Michael Murray didn't even say what Craig said he said. And Oxford University Press is just a publishing company, So it's a lot of what it does.
Rhetorical spin.
It's basically, in that case, he's debating Stephen Law. Stephen Law is not,
I was there. I was live at that.
I was there too as well, actually.
All right.
And I actually met Craig afterwards.
So did I. I gave him a question, and he went. I think I wrote a piece on this. I gave him a real humdinger of a question. He went, "Yeah, good question." He couldn't answer it. Didn't answer. But there you go.
Yeah, I asked him about. We were literally chatting afterwards. I mean, I don't think I had the YouTube channel at that point, but it certainly inspired. Well, maybe I did. I can't remember. Anyway, maybe I did.
I think you probably did. It was around about that time.
I think about it. I probably just started it. Anyway, I can't remember now. But anyway, the point was that he can dress himself up in sciencey sounding stuff and make it seem and of course you put a philosopher like Stephen Law on the spot with animals don't have a prefrontal cortex, so they're not self-aware, and therefore we don't have to worry about animal pain. What are the chances that philosopher knows the neuroscience of prefrontal cortex and what it does? They're small, but because he's not a philosopher of consciousness, so of course he's not going to know this stuff. Why would he?
Yeah.
And so it's a very clever debating strategy. He's like, science endorses my view, but it doesn't. It's just not true, but it's a good debate.
But this is Brandolini's law, which is to say it takes a hell of a lot more effort to unpick someone's bullshit than it does to present that bullshit in the first place. And so even if Stephen Law was to knowledgeably be able to combat that, it would take him another 20 minutes to unpick what Craig had claimed anyway. So it's win-win.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Hey ho. Well, look, I hope hopefully we can do this again, Phil. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. And I advise anyone who's watching to go to, well, let's face it, far more people know about your YouTube channel than ever will about mine. So whatever.
I'm sure there's some that so.
But yeah, no, check out Skydivephil and all the absolutely fantastic documentary sort of videos and critiques that you've done, because they are really valuable stuff. And thank you so much for the contributions that you make. Thank
you very much, and thank you for writing about it, because you're not really able to pick up on some of these things, and you spot them straight away. So it's very impressive.
Oh, good stuff. Well, thanks anyway, mate, and take it easy.
Cheers. Okay, bye bye.